Good morning. Is that steady? Hi. It's a rainy day here in Ann Arbor, as I think you can see. A very dismal, rainy, cold day, which means that my basement will do its pseudo flooding bit again because this rain has been coming for a couple of days, and so I'm going to have to make this quick and get down there with the dry towels. But it does put me in the right state of mind for what I want to talk about today, which is namely this piece in the New York Times that I read this morning by Seth Mydans about the Khmer Rouge trials in Cambodia. And, you know, thank God for the Khmer Rouge as far as the New York Times is concerned, because without the Khmer Rouge, what would the New York Times point to? Who would the New York Times point to reinforce its selective morality about how the world operates and the U.S.'s role in that world? Always positive, if sometimes mistaken or over-idealistic. Well, of course, the Holocaust, the European Nazi Holocaust, is a time special, bread and butter. They always have that to fall back on. Khmer Rouge is right after that. I can't think of any other official enemy regime that has served the New York Times so well propagandistically over the years. And Seth Mydans certainly carries the tradition on. He's one of their best people on this issue, and not just talking about the unique brutality of the Khmer Rouge and going into great intimate detail about the violence committed by the Khmer Rouge against unknowing peasants and so on and so forth, all of which is true. You probably can't exaggerate what the Khmer Rouge did to their own people. I've no doubt it was a complete horror show. Interestingly enough, little sidelight, I hope A.O. Scott wasn't reading this piece because the violence involved, considering how touchy he is with fictional violence. I certainly hope he doesn't read Seth Mydans this morning. It might upset him. What I really like to say about the Khmer Rouge in the New York Times is that there's really no mention about the U.S. role in either creating the conditions for the Khmer Rouge, helping the Khmer Rouge after a certain point in the late 70s, and being against the Khmer Rouge's ouster by the Vietnamese government in 1978. Now, at the end of this piece, Mydans does mention Vietnam and the fact that it overthrew Pol Pot's regime, but he doesn't mention that at the time, the very paper that he's writing for opposed this, what I guess some would call a humanitarian intervention. Certainly had Jimmy Carter or Ronald Reagan had gone into Cambodia and overthrew the Khmer Rouge regime, that would have been seen as a glorious moment in the history of humanitarian intervention. As it was the Vietnamese who did it, and they did it for very selfish reasons, because the Khmer Rouge was conducting cross-border raids, killing hundreds of its civilians, and having just come out of a long anti-imperial struggle against the West, primarily the United States, but also the French. I don't think the Vietnamese were going to put up with that shit whatsoever, and they didn't, and they rolled into Phnom Penh and sent Pol Pot and his lieutenants packing into the jungles of Thailand. Now, at the time, the New York Times reacted to this by calling the Vietnamese the Prussians of Asia, which again shows their sense of humor given to what the United States had just previously done for 15 years in Southeast Asia. So there's that. And the other thing, too, no matter how brutal the Khmer Rouge is portrayed as, and again, I have no quarrel with that, imagine this kind of itemized horror being written about the U.S. in Vietnam, or the U.S. in Cambodia, or Laos for that matter. Or how about the U.S. backing Indonesia's mass slaughter, genocidal slaughter in East Timor, in the same part of the world? I mean, you just wouldn't see this kind of description, this kind of attention to detail, gruesome detail. And again, we know why. It's because the New York Times is a propaganda outlet, and it's there to reassert a certain mentality, a certain state morality, and in that the U.S. is always the good guy. The U.S. always has the best interests of everyone at heart, and if it commits crimes, it's because it's just too full of goodness. You're going to inevitably stumble. Everybody's human, even nation states with cluster bombs and nuclear weapons, and torture sites around the world. So that basically just pisses me off when I read this. It shouldn't piss off an old media critic like myself. I mean, I used to go completely apeshit in the old fair offices and I'd read these things, and Jeff Cohen, the former executive director of FAIR, used to always make fun of me, quite rightfully. He'd always say, "What are they saying now?" Because that was always, or "Look what they're saying now," because that was always my line whenever I would read the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Wall Street Journal. I'd go, "Look what they're saying now! Look at this! This is outrageous!" Well, I thought I had that gland removed from me years ago. It looks like it's growing back. I may have to look into elective surgery to have it purged once and for all. But in any event, this rambling, unfocused rant is basically about the fact that I don't like the New York Times, yet I read it every day, sort of like a heroin addict must shoot up or whatever. I don't know if I'm addicted to the New York Times, but for some reason I feel the need to read it. And they suck me into these pieces. And Seth Meidens, God love you, man. Keep it up. You know where your bread's buttered, baby. We'll talk to you soon.